Before we dive in, where are you tuning in from tonight? I always love hearing from you. Maybe you're bundled up under a blanket in Minnesota, watching snowflakes fall. Or sipping a glass of wine in a quiet Texas neighborhood. Or lying on a warm porch somewhere in Oregon, with the breeze brushing your skin. Wherever you are, this story, well, it caught me off guard. And I think it might do the same to you. It all started with something small, a favor. That morning, I was folding towels with one hand and sipping yesterday's coffee with the other when my phone buzzed. I tapped the speaker. "Can you give Leo a ride home from his shift?" my sister asked out of breath. I'm slammed here. Leo, her son, my nephew. He's 23 now. All long limbs and late-night eyes, still carrying that boyish charm that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. I helped raise him back when my sister was working double shifts. He'd tag along behind me in the kitchen, asking questions about everything from Greek mythology to how I knew I was in love. But lately, life just sped up. I hadn't had a real conversation with him in years. "Sure," I said. "Where's the pickup?" I threw on jeans and a sleeveless linen top, nothing fancy, and headed out. The afternoon light was soft, spilling gold through the trees and stretching shadows across the pavement. When I pulled into the lot behind the small electronics store, Leo was already outside, leaned back against a brick wall, like a still frame from some indie movie. He had one thumb scrolling on his phone and the other hand stuffed in his hoodie pocket. He looked up, smiled wide. That same crooked grin from when he was 8 and brought me a grasshopper in his palms like it was a diamond. "Hey, Aunt Claire," he said, climbing in. Of course I said, I never mind. We pulled out of the lot, and for a while, it was surface talk work school, how his mom was coping with her new role. But something in his voice was different, slower, like he was wading through thoughts deeper than the words allowed. At a red light, I glanced over. "You okay, sweetheart? You seem quiet." He stared ahead for a second. Then he turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like people only see who you used to be, not who you are now?" It was like he'd reached into my own chest and pulled out a thought I hadn't said aloud in years. All the time I told him softly, "You hit a certain age and people stop asking who you're becoming. They just assume the transformation's over." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. That's exactly it." And in that moment, his voice wasn't just filled with frustration. There was longing there. And pain. I turned onto a quieter back road. Trees arched over us like a tunnel of quiet, and the old houses slipped past our windows like ghosts. He exhaled, eyes on the window. I wish someone would actually hear me, not just nod and change the subject, not brush it off because I'm young and figuring it out. I'm trying, but no one listens. His words hit something in me, that old ache. The one I used to ignore during long evenings, folding socks alone after my divorce, after all the caretaking left me with silence. I knew what it felt like to be invisible in your own life. Well, I said gently, "I'm here now. Talk to me, Leo." He turned eyes, searching mine. Not in any inappropriate way, just human, real, vulnerable. "You always saw me," he said. Even when I was a kid. You never treated me like I was in the way. You listened. Like I was already someone. That struck me deeper than I expected. I pulled over into the old overlook, our old spot from summer nights past. The one with the creaky wooden fence and view of the lake just below. The sky was on fire now, orange and lavender, dripping into the trees. I turned off the engine, sat there, hands folded in my lap. You're someone, Leo, I whispered. And you're not the only one who feels this way. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me. Really looked. Then he broke the silence. There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time, he said. My pulse jumped, not with fear, but with that quiet tremble you get right before truth enters the room. Tell me, I said. He hesitated then, let out a shaky laugh. It's weird. I don't want you to think I'm crazy or disrespectful. You could never be either, I told him. Just speak. He turned his body slightly toward me, his voice low, honest. I've always felt closer to you than anyone else in my life. And lately, I've been thinking about you. Not just as my aunt, but as a woman. The air grew thick for a moment, the kind of quiet that presses in from all sides. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the way the last bit of sunlight caught in the fine hairs on his arms. My chest rose slowly, like my body needed extra time to breathe in what he had just said. I looked over at him, this man now, no longer the lanky boy in dinosaur pajamas, begging for pancakes. A grown man sitting beside me, and in that instant, the whole world seemed to pause. Even the trees outside the window felt still, like they were holding their breath with me. Leo glanced down, clearly embarrassed. I'm sorry, he said. That probably sounds awful, but the truth, it didn't. Not at all. I stayed quiet for a while longer, not out of discomfort, but because I was sifting through memories. Remembering the late nights when we'd stay up on the porch, laughing about nothing in particular. How he'd find me at family barbecues just to chat about books or dreams or some weird thought that had crossed his mind. How he'd bring me little trinkets from school, or remember I liked almond milk in my tea when everyone else forgot. And now here we were not nephew and aunt in the rigid rulebook sense, but two adults sitting in the same space, breathing the same moment, both a little raw, a little exposed. When I finally spoke, my voice came out steady. Thank you, I said, for trusting me enough to say that. He looked up quickly, his brows raised in surprise. You're not mad. No, I said slowly, honestly. I'm just trying to understand. And to be completely honest with you, I paused, choosing my words carefully. I felt something shifting too. I just didn't know how to name it. His eyes widened. His lips parted slightly, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard me right. Outside, the sunlight dipped beneath the horizon. Shadows stretched like long fingers over the dashboard. And I realized that this simple ride home was now a moment we'd never forget. A threshold neither of us planned to cross, but somehow already had. We didn't talk for a while. Just sat there, listening to the rustle of leaves outside, to the hum of the world around us. Even though the car was parked, it felt like we were traveling somewhere new and uncertain, and strangely, Neither of us wanted to start the engine just yet. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged. Full. That kind of silence that follows a conversation you know you can't unhave. Something had shifted between us. Something undeniable. And yet, gentle. I stayed behind the wheel, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, staring out at the dusky sky. My heart fluttered in my chest, like a leaf caught in the breeze. Leo shifted slightly beside me. I could feel his gaze even before he spoke. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, exhaling slow. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in." He looked away again, fingers tapping lightly against the seam of his jeans. "I didn't plan to say it," he admitted. "It just kind of happened. I wasn't sure if I'd ever tell you. But when we were talking earlier, I don't know. It just felt right." I gave him a small smile, one part fondness and one part disbelief. Funny how life works, huh? The car was still the world outside, glowing in tones of dusty rose and soft indigo. I turned slightly toward him. The light hit his face just right, his cheekbones, his jawline, and I saw him differently now. Not from above, not from the perch of adult to youth, but across. Eye to eye, soul to soul. I guess I've always been afraid to admit how lonely I've been. I said voice, barely more than breath. After the divorce, after the house emptied out, everything just felt so quiet. And I didn't want to let anyone know how much that quiet hurt. Leo turned to me, his expression tender. No pity, just understanding. The kind that softens you. "I always looked forward to seeing you," he said. "Even when I got older, I never stopped." The honesty in his voice stripped something bare in me. I'd gone so long without being seen, not as a mom, not as a sister, not even as a woman. Just seen. And now here was this young man, this soul I'd watched, grow looking at me with clarity, with admiration, with something deeper. "I don't even know when it started," he went on, "but sometime in the last couple of years, I started thinking about you differently. Not in a weird way. Not something I tried to feel. It just happened. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. And once it started, I couldn't stop. A gentle breeze rolled through the half-open window, brushing my hair across my shoulder. I reached up and tucked it back, staring at my hands in my lap as I tried to calm the fluttering inside me. I think part of me already knew I said at last, but I pushed it away because I told myself that's not right. That's not how things are supposed to be. Leo leaned in slightly. "But who decides what's supposed to be?" he asked. "Isn't it about what's real? About what people actually feel? Not just what they're expected to feel?" His words rang like a bell in a quiet church. "I'm not saying anything should happen," he added quickly. "I'm not trying to push or confuse things. I had to tell you. Because you've always meant something to me. And not just because we are family." That last word, family, hung in the air like the final note of a song still vibrating even after the music had stopped. It reminded me of all the invisible lines we live inside, the roles we inherit without ever asking for them, the expectations handed down like folded napkins at a dinner table. But as I sat there, shoulder to shoulder with this young man, this honest, introspective soul who had grown into someone both brave and gentle. I realized I wasn't thinking about labels anymore. I was thinking about connection, about timing, about how two people could evolve beside each other without even realizing it. Until one day, they looked up and saw not who someone had been, but who they had become. The air between us shifted again, not towards something reckless, but toward something quieter, something fragile, something honest. "Let's go for a drive," I said, suddenly turning the key in the ignition. "Somewhere with a view." Leo smiled and nodded, no questions asked. He trusted me. That's what struck me most, the calm certainty in his eyes. Like he knew I'd never steer him into something he wasn't ready for. Like I was his compass. We drove the winding roads, through the outskirts of town, past golden fields and creeks, catching the last flickers of daylight. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to. The silence between us was its own kind of music. Eventually, I pulled off onto a hilltop that overlooked the valley, an old favorite of mine. I hadn't been there in years. It used to be my sanctuary when the weight of life grew too loud. I turned off the engine and let the stillness settle in. "It's beautiful," Leo said, gazing out at the horizon. "So are you," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, startled, but not uncomfortable. Not thrown off. If anything, it was like something unspoken between us had finally stepped out of the shadows. Something that had been quietly present for a long time, waiting to be acknowledged. "You're not the only one who's been thinking," I said, voice low. I just didn't know how to say it. Or if I even should. Leo reached over gently and took my hand. Not all at once, just our fingers, just enough warmth to bridge the distance. And I didn't pull away. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to," he said. "Just this. This is enough." And strangely it was. That single moment, our hands quietly linked our hearts. Breathing in rhythm felt like a return to something I didn't know I'd lost. Not lust, not confusion, peace. It felt like being seen after years of invisibility. Like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. It wasn't about crossing lines or defying rules. It was about rediscovery. About allowing yourself to feel again after years of convincing yourself there was nothing left to feel. Eventually, I leaned my head on his shoulder, and it felt like breathing, like gravity, like home. The stars began to pierce the deepening sky one by one, shy, uncertain, like they too were just remembering how to shine. I hadn't realized how dark it had gotten until I leaned back and saw the sky stretched wide above us. Still, neither of us moved to leave. I stayed tucked against Leo's shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his chest. Steady. Safe. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air, clean, subtle, just enough to remind me how near he was. "Do you come here often?" he asked quietly. "Not in years," I replied. "Used to be my escape when life got too loud. I'd come here alone, just to breathe again." He nodded. And though he was so much younger, I knew he understood. "I've been trying to find places like that," he said. "Somewhere that feels like belonging. Still haven't figured out where that is." "You will," I said. but don't chase it too hard. Sometimes the answers come when you stop looking, when you're still. He turned toward me slowly, and for a moment there was something in his eyes, soft, searching, vulnerable. "I feel still with you," he whispered. My heart clenched. There was something in those words that pulled me back to a version of myself I thought had faded. The woman who believed that intimacy didn't have to be physical to be powerful. That touch could be soft and slow and sacred. That words could change everything. I reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. My fingers lingered there just a moment longer than they needed to. He didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned in. His eyes fluttered closed, like he hadn't felt something that tender in a long time. "Why me, Leo?" I asked, voice as gentle as the breeze. "Why tell me this? Why now?" He looked down, gathering his thoughts, then met my eyes again. "Because you're the only person who's ever made me feel safe," he said. "Not just when I was a kid, even now. I can talk to you without pretending, without feeling judged. And maybe that's part of why I feel so drawn to you." His honesty split me wide open. I wasn't used to that kind of truth anymore. Not from men my age, who so often came wrapped in scars and defenses and silences. But Leo, he was different. He wasn't afraid to lay his heart out. "I don't want to make your life complicated," he added. "And I'd never want to hurt anyone, especially not your sister." That was the first time either of us had mentioned her. My sister, his mother. The reminder was sharp, real. The layers between us were thick, woven from years of family history, tradition, expectation. I know I said quietly, "This isn't simple. It can't be." But I also can't pretend like nothing's happening, he continued. "Because when I'm around you, I feel something I don't feel anywhere else. And I think you do too." I didn't respond right away, because I did feel it. That afternoon, as the sun began to slide behind the hills, Caroline stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window, but seeing nothing at all. Her hands moved mechanically under the cold water, scrubbing a dish that was already clean. Her mind, however, was lost in the storm of words that Evelyn had hurled at her just hours before. "You think you're the victim? You always play the innocent, but you're just a coward who hides behind silence." Evelyn's voice had cracked as she shouted, her eyes brimming with pain and fury. Caroline hadn't shouted back. She never did. She had simply stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her throat, as if the walls were closing in. It wasn't that she didn't have anything to say, she had too much. Too many truths that had never been spoken aloud. Too many regrets that clung to her like dust in the corners of a forgotten room. Later, when Evelyn had stormed out the door, slamming with a finality that shook the whole house, Caroline had sunk to the floor, the cool tile grounding her in the silence that followed. That was always how their fights ended, not with resolution, but with retreat. Now, as twilight deepened and the kitchen dimmed, Caroline let the water run over her hands like a prayer. The sky outside turned lavender and gold, but she didn't notice. What lingered in her mind wasn't Evelyn's anger, but the brokenness behind it. The look in her sister's eyes that said I needed you and you weren't there.